Our next presenter is about to wow you with something cool, and our presenter is Beth Hetland. Beth is an award-winning educator and critically acclaimed cartoonist hailing from Chicago. She teaches several comics and comics-related courses at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Her newest book, Tender, published by Fantagraphics, is a Harvey Award nominee for Book of the Year. Beth is deeply dedicated to self-publishing, paper engineering, and sharing her enthusiasm for cartooning. Please welcome Beth.
Wow. Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Cartoon Crossroads, and holy cow, y'all, Friday morning, here we are, tearing it up. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Hi, I'm Beth. Ben read some fun facts about me, but I'm going to tell you some other fun facts about me. I love sandwiches. I love horror movies, and I live in Chicago, so I love when the spring blooms finally poke through the snow and let us know that the dark days are over. In the Midwest, we can relate, yes? Things I don't like. I don't care for spiders. I don't care for the heat. This humidity is killing me, y'all. And if you're a gamer, I really don't like those robot guardians in Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. They freak my bean out. I have 2 cats. I live in Chicago, and I teach at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which is a whole whopping mouthful, so I'm going to be saying SAIC. So if you hear me say SAIC super fast, that's what that means. Okie doke. But I'm not here to necessarily talk about the things that I like. I'm here to give you a little bit of context first about like who am I and what I'm bringing to the table here. So this is a small selection of publications I've created since 2011. Many of them are self-published mini comics and zines. They're a combination of works created collaboratively with my BFF, Kyle O'Connell, as well as solo works. Tender up in that corner, that's the new one. You can pick up most of these tomorrow or Sunday. Tender is the new one, shameless plug. It's out with Fantagraphics, very exciting. I wanted to show a smattering of the comics I've made to emphasize that for me, teaching and making comics go hand in hand. As part of my faculty contract at SAIC, I'm required to be active in my own practice. And for many faculty, that means showing at galleries or producing academic papers. For cartoonists, that means putting out work consistently and finishing it, right? So that includes self-publishing, that includes like traditional publishing. But this kind of thing is important for your CV and for applying to teaching positions, is that your self-published work is part of your professional experience. Any zine, any comic, any finished thing, whether web or in person, that's part of your professional credentials, okay? First and foremost, though, if you're thinking about teaching, whether in college or in workshops or whatever other venue you're looking at, you gotta get your foot in that door, okay? This is you, the axe, and this is everywhere else who's like, I'm interested in a class for comics, right? They seem afraid, but I promise you, they're very excited. Honestly and truly, this is the most difficult step. In my experience, tenacity and relentlessness are a big part of it, right? I feel like my motto professionally is be the water against the rocks, okay? You will wear it down eventually. All right, that might sound intense, but like, y'all, that's who I am, right? We're like 5 minutes in, that's a good taste of who Beth Hetland is. A lot of teaching also means being nimble and thinking creatively about solutions. So getting your foot in the door means building a big list of potential locations that might be interested in a workshop. Start small. If you've never taught before, libraries, after-school clubs, all these places that are listed here, these are part of places that are excited about comics, because all of us in this room know comics are the best. And they don't even know what they're missing out, and they want it, and so you're here to help propose and pitch it to them, okay? You want to research everything you possibly can about these spaces, find out what type of events they have, what do they typically host, any of their contact information of who works there, people who organize events, and even attend events to see what they are like. If they do a lot of kids content, this is a space for you to propose adult makerspace content. If they do a lot of hands-on workshops, pitch something that is either along the lines of a different type of hands-on workshop or present potentially an academic panel, right? Think about what is there and what's not there. This is my 13th year teaching at SAIC, and in that time, I've taught a huge variety of students and courses, and any adjunct will tell you that I've worked my fair share of supplemental administrative positions, as I like to say, aka other jobs. In tandem with building your list of places, this is an example of figuring out what are the skills that you bring to the table. What are the various pieces that you know professionally that you can then bring to a teaching setting, right? So not just thinking about the making of comics, but any of your professional development skills. Do you feel like you're extra good at setting up a table for conventions? Bring that to a workshop. Do you feel like you are super strong at breaking down comics pages and panels? Bring that to a workshop. Talk about the things that are valuable on a small scale that you already have and pitch that into a professional class. I really recommend starting on that small scale first, so finding that very first opportunity either for a workshop or at a makerspace or an after-school group before you take on a full semester of classes. And I do want to kind of break down a little bit of like academia, and specifically, again, this is speaking from my experience at SAIC, so other schools are going to differ, right? When I first got my foot in the door, thanks to a mentor of mine, gotta click this slide too, with Serbi Ghosh, was leaving her prior enrolled classes at SAIC. She was leaving with classes that were filled and on the schedule. And so she was in a position to say, I'm out, we need somebody else. So she was able to pitch me. She helped me with my CV. She mentored me. She helped me with my cover letter, building a syllabus, etc. And so I was able to be in the right place at the right time with the right credentials and the right referral, right? That's a lot of rights. You want to try to stack your deck for yourself. Be nimble, be prepared. So start building a CV now, and we'll talk a little bit about what that is. Start putting together your roster of ideas. Being adjunct is different than being full-time. So at SAIC on the right-hand side here, what you can see is what is called the academic ladder. These are the various positions that you can hold as a faculty member at the school. And the lowest or the most entry level would be considered a lecturer. This is a lot of what I think most schools define as like an adjunct population. And so you're being paid per course, you're not being given any other benefits, and you're just kind of like a gun for hire, right? As you apply for promotions, based on how long you've been there and your credentials for your professional portfolio, you can move up, but only if there is availability in the departments you currently teach in. There is a lot of bureaucracy that comes with teaching at the collegiate level. And so not only do you have to be a skilled professor, but you also have to be willing and able to navigate that bureaucracy if you are interested in advancing. Currently, I am an adjunct full professor, and I get asked a lot of the time, so when are you going to be full-time? And I wish it was that easy, but full-time only comes when you have applied, if the position is right, and you are the strongest candidate who makes it through the like circus of adventures to get there, right? Now, why does that deal with you, right? This, like, you're like, I don't really care about this particular thing. However, I did not start at this position. I started as a lecturer, and the way that I approached doing this was to find the department chairs, find their contacts at the school, and pitch classes to them. To say, I see your department, I think comics could fit here, here is my idea for a class. And because of that, I am not in one only location. I am in 4 departments across the school, which means that my odds for being able to apply and advance for promotion in a specific department are ×4. This is a strategic move, okay? This is not because I love going to 4 department meetings. Okay, so now it's about pitching, right? So we need to talk about pitching a little bit. When you've identified what your skills are that you think you could put together, as well as some locations for where you could teach, now is the pitching process. There is not a right or wrong way to pitch a class for this, and I think there's a lot of overlap for professionals in pitching a graphic novel, pitching an animation show, pitching an idea to somebody. You're assembling documents to communicate clearly what your vision is for the thing you would like to do. Those in its basics are exactly the same. My MO for pitching is to be the path of least resistance. I want to make it oh so easy for somebody to imagine me in their classroom teaching this content with full seats. I want them to know that it's going to be successful, okay? So being the path of least resistance means, number one, find the right person at the right time. Wow, what a terrible piece of advice for a group of people. How do you even do this? Now, that's actually okay, right? So when you're thinking about, and again, I'm thinking specifically for the collegiate level. So when you're thinking about, I want to teach at a college level, I want to teach college-age students or people, schools start planning their next full year by the time October and November hit of the previous year. So if you want to pitch a class, you need to be ready mid-September or earlier to pitch for, say, the fall 25-26 academic year. So my classes all the way through 26 are already planned right now. Yeah, so find the right person at the right time is a little bit of like, again, learning the bureaucratic hoops, trying to figure out how does that align with your own mental schedule, and then getting those to line up. So finding out who's the contact, where are the department chairs? Is there a curriculum committee? Do you need to actually fill out a form to pitch a new class? What are these things? Who do you get in contact with? And how do you get a hold of them? Okay, so next, make it easy to imagine this class. I want whoever receives this pitch to not have to work hard about saying yes to me, okay? I want to show them everything I can without giving them everything that they could hand to anyone else. There still needs to be things that involve the Beth Hetland experience, right? I don't want it to just be like, here's my syllabus, here's all the assignments, here's all the readings, here's everything, because I need to hold a little bit of that for myself so that there's a reason for them to choose me. However, I don't want them to have to work too hard. So the things that I include in my pitches are a really sexy title. These are titles of my current classes. The Artist Formerly Known as Starving. Right, yeah, it's pretty sexy. Comics, Publish or Perish, right? Limits and Lineage. Amazines, right? These are some of the titles that I've done for my class. So I wanted to have a snappy title. I wanted to draw attention while being explanatory. If I just had Limits and Lineage, you would have no idea what this is about. But comics, Limits and Lineage, you might be like, I don't know, but it says comics, right? Similarly, you want to aim for a 2 to 3 sentence description of that class. So summarize what it's going to be. Students will create a 32-page comic, put together a mini comic, and critique each other in class. Readings will supplement the assignments, right? You can speak generally while still being specific about what needs to happen. And then I often include a sample assignment. So a short assignment, maybe an exercise, a 1 week, a 2 week, a 1 hour, a 2 hour. So we're gonna do a dream comic. Students will document their dreams for a week and they will make a 1-page comic in class that describes one of their dreams or takes inspiration from. You also need to explain how this fulfills a need or fits into the current curriculum. For a college level, you can take a look at the other course offerings. You can think about what is working and what's not or what's missing. For a library or a makerspace or any other alternative location, think about what they already offer and how what you could bring to the table would be different. Something that I think is really helpful with a comics class is that you can highlight that it is a low-cost supply class, right? We can do it with just pencil and paper, no problem. We can run a comics class. I also think that you need to be thoughtful and strategic for your argument about why this fulfills a need. So if you're thinking about how many people are interested in middle grade graphic novels currently, then having a middle grade graphic novel workshop is beneficial because you already know there's an audience there, right? One of the things that I've noticed, just generally speaking, is many collegiate level schools are lacking a digital tools or digital drawing and painting class. This is something that my students are using constantly. I am using constantly. There is not a curriculum or a class for them to learn this. I think that's a misstep. So that's one for y'all. You can have it. Quickly and concisely identifying your qualifications. So this includes both your professional experience as a cartoonist and any teaching qualifications you might have. This could also include leadership if you don't have any teaching experience. Any place where you can indicate that you have been able to be in control of a space and guide people through things. that can be applicable as well. This is also an appropriate opportunity to reference any contacts you might have that may have referred you to this. So like, oh, you know, I'm a former student of Beth's. I was a TA for her, right? She recommended me for this position. Check your network and see if anybody else has worked here or done this before. This also, I think, leads me to specifically talking about the difference between a CV or a curriculum vitae and a resume. Do folks know the difference between these two? Some yes and some no. Okay, fantastic. So a resume is intended to be a one-sheet summary of your work experience. One sheet only, meaning one side of a piece of paper, to be like, I did this, 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 this. It's meant to be skimmable, it's meant to be fast, and it's meant to be very quickly outlining your qualifications and relevant experience. A CV, as you can see from this fairly grainy, low quality image, is multiple pages to outline every single professional experience you've ever had. When you get to a point in your career, you're gonna start editing it, right? You don't want something that's like a 46-page CV. However, CVs are typically between 7 and 10 pages. They're quite lengthy. For a comic CV, this includes your zines, this includes your self-published work. It also includes any time you give a talk at a convention, say right now for myself, or that you table at a festival. Any of where your work lives in a collection. So where it's housed, where is it living? Whose collections are those in? That should be outlined in there. All of that stuff is part of your professional CV. And be relentless, of course. This is, I think, my number one. This is how I imagine myself, is that I think about myself as a shark with a laser beam strapped to its head, and then I point my laser beam at things and I go for it, right? Part of the lesson for this is that sharks can't go backwards or they'll die. Now, it's not that heavy stakes for myself. However, I do think about this a lot, is that part of my MO of, like I said, water against the rocks is I'm aiming to get 100 no's. I want to put out as many pitches. It's a statistical game. It is about trying to be relentless, be flexible, and find a way to pitch as often as possible to as many places as you can so you can get your footing. All right. Let's talk about once you already have your foot in that door. So building a syllabus. This one I think really varies for a lot of people, but if you're coming into this saying, I've never taught before, I want to teach, I want to build a syllabus, these are kind of like really basic pieces for you. And please know again, you can take this however you want to, you can do whatever you want with this. It's fair game. I like to, when I'm approaching a syllabus, is I like to work backwards. I start with what I want students to have at the end of the semester and walk away with, both have meaning like experience, knowledge, and then what they're adding to their portfolios or their professional documents. And then I want to work backwards in the semester for building that. So this is a quick overview of one of my classes this semester. This is the artist formerly known as Starving. The syllabus itself is a contract with your students. It should be taken pretty seriously. I take it seriously, not everybody does, but I want them to know what I intend for them and that they have the option during the time where they can swap classes to say, yes, I'm in, or no, I'm out. And that's important to me as like a professor. The main purpose is to communicate this and also explain what they need to do to earn credit for this class or what they need to do in order to pass, right? That is a main piece of this. So that includes for me an attendance policy, participation policy, how they earn credit, what my digital device policy is. So can they be on their phones? Can they have headphones in? What does that look like? Methods of communication. Can they email me? Can they use our school messaging center? Can they do all these other pieces? Can they send me a carrier pigeon? Can they text me in the middle of the night, right? The answer to those two are no. I will not accept pigeons or texts or anything else that I want to communicate to them ahead of time or as early as possible. I try to have my policies and a general week-to-week summary of what we're going to do. This does not necessarily get into the nitty-gritty of what the lecture is, what the exercise is. Not even all of my guests are on here. I think some of them are, and some of them say TBD, or that I just haven't listed them. I've like taken them off. I want to be as clear as I can in the same way that I would with a contract. I want someone to know what they're getting into before they agree to be in this class, okay? I leave flexibility. This does not have every single minute of every time planned out. I think that teaching has to be flexible. You have to be prepared to meet your students and adjust what they need and where they're at any given time. So I need to leave space for that. Sometimes my own notes for what I'm doing in a class will say lecture TBD, especially towards the end of the semester. And then I will see how students are able to pick up the material I'm giving them, and if I need to elaborate or go back to something, or maybe we ran out of time because a guest was very lengthy in their discussion and it was awesome, but we got to kick that lecture down the road, right? Leave space for that. I think it's also important to meet the students where they are. This, I think, also goes into when you're building a syllabus, the idea of how you're breaking up either your class times or the semester. So specifically thinking about the semester, I think there are 3 different approaches that I see that are most common, as well as ones that I use myself. So equal halves, that means we have a midterm and we have a final, okay? Equal thirds would be we kind of break the class into 3 individual equal weighted projects. And then an incremental build. So this would be a little bit more for like an intro or a beginner level class where we're starting with, say, building characters. Then the next week we're going to do environments. The next week we're going to do characters in an environment. Then we're going to do a panel gag, then a 4-panel, then a 1-page, then a 2-page, et cetera, et cetera. You can do whatever feels good for you and what makes sense for the class. But no matter what I'm teaching, I want my students to be reading comics. That is a huge outcome and a huge piece of what I want them to take away from the classes that I'm teaching, is that I want there to be discussion. I want to push my students to think critically. I want to expose them to creators and artists and stories they maybe haven't been exposed to. I typically have them read anywhere from 5 to 12 graphic novels a semester. We have like a 15-week semester. So that's almost a book a week, right? And I'm like, hey, you're so lucky to read comics every week, guys. Like, don't worry about it. When I select these, I really try to think about demographic and voices I'm representing. I think that I also think about how the content flows from one to the next and how the readings relate to any topics we might be covering in class. These are sort of stacked in 2 different piles. So on the left hand is sort of content we're thinking about in a variety of different classes or reading for stories. And then content on the right is a collection of professional development books that I have for my professional practices class. So these are a little bit more of like guidebooks, things about like how do you deal with your finances. One of the ones I really enjoy is Get the Hell Out of Debt. Same thing with like the little tiny one on the top there is A Cat's Guide to Money, which if you don't know it, high recommend. It's like cat illustrations explaining how to balance your budget and have a mortgage. It's awesome. It's perfect for like students as like an entryway. The other thing that I do with all of my readings is that, and I think it's important for teaching in the current year, is that I keep track of content warnings. I have a little post-it inside of all of my books that outline things that I think might be something I should give a student a heads up about. I try to encourage them to research the books ahead of time so that they're aware of any material. In my school also, we have a process called accommodation letters, which means that a student might present to me an accommodation letter, and in those accommodation letters, it could have any number of things that are to communicate to me in a private way that this student needs additional resources to be successful in my class. Some of those accommodations are to disclose specific content warnings. So I try to keep track of those and make sure that I'm being on top of what I can do for that. For more advanced level classes, I will often assign the first 3 or 4 books, and then I will give them a survey of like 100 different graphic novels and make them fill out what they've read, what they haven't read, so that I can sort of build a curriculum that's specific to them. I do that a lot in my graduate classes. Another thing that I think is important about building a syllabus, especially at either a collegiate level or working with a makerspace, is what other resources do you have access to as a professor? And what other resources do your students have access to? Take them there. I know it sounds silly, and sometimes when I work at a place for a long time, I think, of course everyone's been to the library. And yet, no, right? I'm like, I ask my students, how many of you have been to the print services area of the school? And like 4 raise their hands. Especially right now, it is important to take them places, show them the facilities, make sure they're aware of what their access is given to them, and have them experience things that are not just me blabbering all the time, right? Break it up. It's good for you, the professor, and it's good for the students. Okay, so we're like winnowing down into thinking about assignments now. Assignments, I think, are so fun to design. This is like one of my favorite parts of making classes, is figuring out what are the things I want students to think about or students to work on. Where are some of the pieces of comics that I think are so important? And the most important thing is to break things into bite-sized pieces. I literally just had a workshop guest teach my class on Thursday, and they were like, okay, we're gonna do this 2-hour workshop, and we're all gonna make this plushie that I made the pattern for, and it's gonna be no problem. And of course, we got to 2 hours in, and we had finished maybe 4 of those steps. And I was like, yes, this is important to remember, that things take time in a classroom. Breaking them down into bite-sized steps so that you think, okay, we're gonna draw Doug the diver here, so draw a circle. And they're like, where's my paper? Right? Like, things you don't anticipate are sometimes the hurdles to get you to those steps. So plan for that. Think about that. Do you want your students to get drawing right away? Do you want your students to be thinking concept first? How do you want to integrate those things? I want to do technique and concept at the same time. I want to talk about unique character design while I'm also having them make unique characters. One of the assignments that I've had my students do, again, going back to this concept that my work and my teaching are connected, they're related. So I had them do, at one point, a 1-sheet comic, and I showed them 10 different ways to make comics with just 1 sheet of paper. And the assignment was for students to pick one of those methods and then create a story that made sense for that binding. Not just any old story to shove into any old binding, but really think about how content and concept can meet. I want them to think about planning. I want them to think about printing. I want them to think about how this work meets each other. Where is this intersection? And then I also show them the steps that I took to do this. So this is my actual totally messy bananas only for me mock-up for making that book that you saw animated. This is a lined piece of paper with colored pencils coloring on it to say where and what fits in these places. When I'm making new work, I want to be in the moment of making things, but I'm also thinking forward. I need to demonstrate that to my students. A professor said to me in figure drawing one time, he was like, don't ever trust a teacher who can't show you what they mean. I think about that all the time. I think about that so often, and I take that really seriously. To me, I think self-publishing, mini comics, putting your own work out and understanding those processes and making intentional decisions is so integral to being a cartoonist and being a maker, that this is why so much of this is linked into my class. This is the reverse side of that mock-up. Teaching is a lot about taking those internal and intuitive steps that you take all the time and breaking it down and explaining it to someone else. That takes time, and that takes effort to kind of slow your own mental processes down, as well as how do you explain it to them in a different way, and in an even different way, and an even different way, right? So really trying to take a second to consider how you would articulate these types of steps to each other. I also like to show them that process is messy. It can be incomplete, it can be raw ingredients, it can be confusing, and you can also make choices that you don't have an answer for, and that's okay too, but I need to demonstrate that. I also like to give them low stakes assignments to see where they're at and help foster critique and feedback environment. At my school, feedback and critique are a massive part of how we evaluate and how students are able to grow in their studies. This type of low stakes assignment could take shape as a weekly diary comic. So the objective is primarily just to get in the habit of making and finishing it and then talking about it. But it could be anything. So this, for example, is they had to make a 4-panel comic. And then we looked at all of them. We talked about all of them. The artist had an opportunity to respond to any of the feedback, but also talking to them about what they're doing, breaking down what's working, and talking about how they can improve their work. Their assignment was to focus on dialogue, and they were able to choose out of 4 options. So one of the options was 2 characters talking to each other, Another option was 3 or more characters conversing. I don't think I have any examples of those. A character conversing with the audience or a monologue, and then a character conversing with an inanimate object. Many of them chose an inanimate object, which I think is fascinating. I don't know why. I think it's because they think it's easy, right? They don't have to think about two-sided conversation. They can just think about one way. But I think that that's fascinating, and that's something to like learn from and pay attention to. I also like to make sure that I'm still talking about technical elements. And so sometimes I will do demos, like my classes have an aspect of demonstration, my classes have an aspect of lecture, they have an aspect of exercises that are community and exercises that are individual. For one of them, I have them do a perspective exercise, and I'm showing them that exercise. We do it traditionally first, and then we do it digitally. I think that kind of balance in between these two skills is really important and really valuable for those students so that they understand what it means to try to utilize orthogonal lines and vanishing points in real space and have to grapple with how your eyeballs communicate three-dimensional space. And then we flatten it and we see what does that look like when you're using perspective tools, when you're using snap to guides, when you're using Procreate, when you're using 3D models, when you're tracing a photo. How do those things work differently, and how are these students able to see the difference, which is very important. Ultimately, in a lot of my classes, what I'm aiming for is for students to make finished products. I want them to have a printed, finished piece that is something that we can hold, that we can touch. In our final crits, we will look at and pass around and exchange mini comics with each other. I think that physical product is still important, and especially for students who are working digitally, how are they translating their digital comics or their web comics into a physical format? And how are they emulating that reading experience, which I think is really exciting. These are also, they get collected as part of like the school, put them inside of our library. I think it's pretty rad. So day to day, when you're in the classroom, one of the questions I get from colleagues and peers is how to manage time. How do you juggle the amount of time that you have with students? How do you anticipate how long something's gonna take? How much prep work do you have? How do you break up the day for different things? How do you keep people engaged? So I made you some pie charts. Hope everybody likes pie. For my classes at SAIC, we have 2 different sort of structures. One of them is a 5-hour studio class, and the other one that I'll show you in a minute is a 2-hour and 45-minute class. So this is a very loose data supplement. This is me kind of taking a guess at how I approach each day. So for the 5-hour duration of this class, I will typically lecture for no more than 45 minutes. That is my personal cap for how long I can listen to somebody. There are students who certainly cannot. That's fine. But this is my cap, which is how I'm building it. Okay. Sometimes those lectures are much shorter. Sometimes they're broken up with a lot of like call and response. Like I'll ask questions. We'll try to make it more interactive. I also like to start the day with a discussion. So typically when we kick off our class session, the very first thing we'll do is everybody's kind of rolling in with their coffee and their breakfast. We're sitting around and we're talking about comics. I think that's a nice way to have like a soft rollout. I think that also helps accommodate students who need flexibility with what time they can arrive based on their own physical accessibility needs. And I think it's just a pleasant thing to do. I will also typically do a demo that is roughly an hour or so of like, here's how we're doing something, or here's how we're bringing out the exercise. I will give them feedback, or they will give each other feedback. We kind of mix it up into small groups or a big group or like a one-on-one session that alters for roughly about 1 hour and 15 minutes. So it's very, very short. It's not each student gets 1 hour and 15. It's that those are kind of clipped. They're meant to be sort of quick. We want to get to the point. We're not here to sort of pull teeth. We also have a lot of work time. Part of the studio requirement at our school is to have access to facilities, and so I want to honor that. I don't want to fill every minute of my day. The students don't want that either. They want to make sure they have time to like sit and draw or make something. And then of course, we all need breaks in life. For the 3-hour seminar, which is actually 2 hours and 45 minutes, this is a much shorter condensed version. These are typically don't include work time. This is more of a lecture-based seminar. This is less of studio facilities. This is a little bit more about nuts and bolts. I still try to keep my lectures to 45 minutes or less, even though it's a seminar. 3-hour lecture is not for me. I can't do it. I don't want to. We still do our discussions. We take about a 15-minute break. And then part of the seminar that I do is I want these students to know each other. In a studio class, community is built very quickly. They're often working together. They're often in the studios together. They're like in the trenches, making comics together. In a seminar class, it's a lot less of that. Some students don't feel comfortable verbally participating. Some students are a little bit more shy. I want them to get to know each other. So I intentionally build in workshops and exercises so that they're not just, oh, I think I had a class with this person at some point. This is my way to help bring community into this space. Doing okay on time. So one of the other things that I do specifically in my classes is I think about the 3-way delivery method. Is anyone familiar with what this is? Some yes, some no. Okay, so very quickly, 3-way delivery method is a way to bring in your materials and try to think about providing the same material in 3 different ways. So I want to give a digital version of what the lecture is. I want to give them a pre-recorded version of the lecture. I want to give them a handout about the lecture. Or I want to show them a handout about inking that's illustrated, like using a brush. I want to give them a real-time demo. This is not real time. And then I want to pre-record and have those elements as well. So really thinking about the ways in which we're accessing student learning engagement and the way in which students prefer to learn versus like only giving material in one particular way. We're trying to cast a wide net to catch as many people and help them understand the material as possible. All right, this one makes me a little bit sick sometimes, so we're gonna move on. This 3 ways is not just for your content and how you're providing it to students. This is also a way for you to consider, how do you think about engagement in a classroom? Does it have to mean eye contact? Does it have to mean verbal participation? Does it have to mean submitting the same assignments as each other? How do you define engagement? And what are the ways that you can meet your students in 3 different ways for the class? Experiment on how students submit their work. Have them experiment on how they're participating in the classroom. I know that we're all cartoonists here, and oftentimes, like, somebody drawing in class is not a big deal. In their other classes, that is a big deal. If you're teaching students who are not college age, they are often scolded about drawing in class. I will encourage visual notes. I will encourage them that they are not allowed to use words. When we were teaching virtually, we had days where they could only use the comment section with emoji. We could only speak to each other in pictures. Try different ways to encourage these students to participate. It does not always have to mean the exact same way, the exact same time. Same thing with critique and feedback. Verbal critiques are not everyone's strength. Sometimes written critique needs to happen. So we do pre-reading of everyone's final projects ahead of time. Everyone is required to submit written feedback for each student, and we conduct an in-person critique verbally. They are welcome to repeat things they've written about, or they're welcome to reference those, but this is a way for students who are receiving critique not only to process that material, but also those who are not comfortable speaking to be able to articulate their thoughts and not feel steamrolled in the space. All of this is to say is thinking about how traditional classrooms in education don't have to be the way that you approach it. You don't have to do all of the things that you grew up with. You can take and pick and choose. You can use differentiated instruction. You can swap your classroom. You can have students lead sessions. I frequently will have students who are really confident or really great and feel really good about something. I'll have them do the demo. I want them to feel empowered to look at this classroom as colleagues, not as a hierarchical, I know everything and you're the student. This is about information sharing. This is about a space where we are building trust with each other. That's really important to me. If you're interested in community building, this is a book that I think is really excellent. This is Community, The Structure of Belonging by Peter Block. Community is one of those ways in which we build trust with each other. This is something that I think comics is so excellent at, is that we have this community and we are a part of it, and it's very easy to see. I want my students to know that the second they walk into my classrooms, they're part of that community for me. This includes things like learning their names. It sounds so basic, but I mean it. Learn their names, pronounce them correctly. Take the time it takes to pronounce them right. Learn their pronouns if they want to share them. Pay attention to when and if those pronouns change. That's your job, to help them feel comfortable. It also means greeting the students, saying hi, seeing them in the hallways, being generous, being thoughtful. Again, showing them that you are also part of this is a way that we're building mutual trust with each other. This is essential to building a social fabric. This also occurs in an infinite number of tiny little movements. It's also important that in your classrooms, you're building that trust through setting up expectations and community guidelines. Something that I have done for my classes is on the first or second day, we will establish community guidelines and say, what are we here to do together? What are the things that we as a group want? Not just what Beth wants for you. You already saw that in my syllabus, but what do you want from me? What do you want from each other? And we talk about that. So some of that has to do with the language we're using. Some of that has to do with how we're participating in feedback and critiques. Some of that has to do with what I'm doing in a classroom. Some of that has to do with like, I just want to get up and wiggle sometimes, right? Yeah, let's do it. Is wiggle okay? Yes or no, right? We put that together, and this sets the expectation that in this classroom, we're working together, not just me bringing you things. I want to make sure that I'm giving you some resources. If you're interested, these are some of, I have another slide for this as well, but these are some of the resources or books that I've utilized in teaching. We've got the Scott McCloud trilogy, Ivan Burnetti's cartooning book, of course, everything Linda Berry makes, but specifically making comics. I really like this Drawing Comics Lab by Robin Chapman, or edited by Robin Chapman, and then Jessica Abel and Matt Madden's 2 books I think are really fantastic. I think that, everyone had a chance to take your pictures? Yeah, okay, great. Moving on. I also really love these for younger age or workshop or shorter based classes. This is only some of the Adventures in Cartooning books, and then I personally really love the Ed Emberley books. I think that they do such a good job of leveling the playing field when somebody comes in feeling like, I can't draw, I'm not good at it, I don't know how. This is such a great way to break down into really basic and simple shapes for any age of how to access more complicated imagery. The last little thing I want to talk to you about is this big old fancy word that I think faculty and educators throw around all the time, which is pedagogy. It just means, what is your method, right? We don't have to use this term, but we can use this term. Sometimes I feel a little like prickly about using it, but like, what are you doing in your classroom? What do you believe in? What are your methods? This shows up frequently as like a written statement or a teaching philosophy, which again is something you might see in a job application or when you're pitching or when you're going up for promotion or tenure positions. But this is really to talk about what are you doing in the classroom quite literally. How are you fostering, like, is community important to you? And if so, how are you fostering it? What are the steps you're taking to do that? This whole talk is basically my pedagogy of like, here's how I approach teaching, here are my thoughts and my philosophies on this. It's helpful to write it out, to at least exercise that once or twice. Even if you're just doing workshops, it's again useful to say, what is important to you? What are your values? And then how do you, one of the things I like to do is ask myself, why am I teaching? Why is it important to me to do this position? Sometimes that answer, and I'm not gonna lie, is like, I need money, like, okay. But I wanna push people further than that. Like, why am I doing this? If you can do anything, why do this? I think the students help you discover what your pedagogy is. I think students can also help you understand why you're doing something. And until you're in those roles, I think about the faculty that meant something to me when I was a student. So 2 people I think I wanna highlight here when I was figuring out my own path is a faculty who had a huge impact on me. His name is Jason Lutz. You might know him as famed cartoonist Jason Lutz. But something that stuck out to me about how Jason approached teaching at the Center for Cartoon Studies was his method for helping students contextualize and understand feedback and critique. Prior to our first critique in his class, he gave this lecture that, as I remember it, comparing comics to ships and saying that each of us in class had our own ship. Some people's ships were like a dinghy, And some people's ships were like this huge, massive sail ship. Some people's were motorboats. Some people's were this. Some people's were that, right? It's a yacht, maybe. I don't know anything about boats. He emphasized that everybody's ship is different and that we are all the captains of our own ship. But the rest of us in this room, we're here to be the crew. We're here to be your first mate. We're here to help you by being on this ship with you and telling you what we're seeing. To say, hey, captain, look out over there. But that no matter what the crew said, at the end of the day, the captain was the one to make the decision about what they did with that information. I think about that constantly. There are other CCS folks in here who I know, and maybe your memories are a little bit different, but to me, even thinking about those lectures and that moment of being told, like, you're the captain of this ship, and the rest of us are not here to take over that ship. We're not here to steer it in a new direction. We're not here to rebuild it. You get to decide that. I have chills thinking about that moment. That's really important to me. The other faculty who I think is really important, and of course it's impossible to name every single faculty who had an impact on me, but the other one was Surbi Ghosh, who I mentioned. She's the one who kind of gave me my first step up into a teaching position, but she's also the person who opened my eyes to comics, and she's the person who introduced me to the Center for Cartoon Studies, so she's a pretty big deal to me. But at the end of the semester, for every single class that I took with her, we would exchange comics. This is not a new concept. This is not a unique concept. However, the thing that impacted me the most was Surbi made a new book to exchange with us. And her motto was, if you don't have a book, you don't get to exchange. And she took that extremely seriously. These are her books that I still have, that I still carry around with me. Because seeing somebody genuinely participate in this class with me to say, you are my colleague and here's how, meant the world. This is something I put into practice for a very long time in my career until it became unstable. And then that was detrimental to my own personal health and life. But I still believe in it. I still think it's important. I still think it's valuable. But it's okay to take a step back from maybe a little bit of that. And to summarize some of this pedagogy is that this is the other piece of advice that I think is incredibly important that I received early in my teaching career. Be as generous with your students as your mentors were with you. That is such a guiding light to me on the worst of days and on the best of days. I hope that you will take this with you. I hope you will think about generosity. I hope you will think about encouraging trust, both in and out of the classroom. And I think that it's important to remind yourself that you care about comics, and this is why you're teaching it. Questions?
Yes. For your reading component, we have to read a lot of stuff. Is that all contained in your discussion component of the class? Where you're like, hey, I'll talk about the book we all read this week, or do you have exercises or assignments connected to it?
Yeah, great question. So part of the deal is I'm going to repeat the question so that we can all hear it in the recording later. The question was, for the readings, is that predominantly contained in the discussion component, or are there additional assignments or activities that relate to the readings? Did I summarize that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Okay, great. It's a mix, right? Ultimately, it's a mixed bag. It depends on the reading, it depends on the class, and it kind of depends on what level we're at as a group of people. Sometimes, early in the semester, we will primarily focus on just discussing the reading, getting into the habit of breaking down what did we read, how are we moving past just I like it, I don't like it. Sometimes that takes a little bit of coaxing and understanding. And then later on in the semester, and oftentimes in my more advanced classes, for example, I teach a senior level class, that's the Publish or Perish one. And we read one book in a semester, and it's Asterius Polyp by David Mazzucchelli, and we break down what is he doing. We have multiple discussions, multiple activities, multiple reading groups where we're saying okay, here we go. How is this related to these themes? What motifs is he using? I ask them to analyze, to think a little bit deeper, and we do multiple different versions of how they're interacting with the reading. I also have a project coming up in a new class that's coming, that's going to be where we take, they'll get to pick a graphic novel, and then they're gonna break it into like story beats to talk a little bit about like how are they writing, because it's a much more writing heavy seminar. And then there's also like there's a variety of different ways. Sometimes I'll give them like a reading guide, sometimes I'll give them like discussion prompts, sometimes I will ask them to create the discussion prompts to be the leaders or ambassadors of that. It's a lot. It's many different things. I think variety is the spice of life, right? That's that's my terrible summary of that. Great question. Any other questions? Yes.
I teach at Columbus College where design and burnout with teaching is an increasing issue.
Oh boy.
I was wondering if you would be up for sharing, how you manage burnout in your teaching practice.
Wonderful. The question was, how do you manage burnout in your teaching practice? I really feel this question deep in my soul and in my shoes right now, because I feel like I have been going too fast, too furious for the last 13 years. And I think that each semester I'm trying to find new ways to grapple with my own personal burnout. One of the big ones for me personally, I think, comes with the privilege of being able to like not have to teach every single thing that gets offered to me or having to like scramble so hard. So I think that comes with time, unfortunately. I also think this is going to be a terrible answer. Get ready for this. One of the things that helped me with my teaching burnout was doing a different job. But also at the school. So one of the things I did was, for a long time, I was an admissions portfolio reviewer. And so I would go on the road and talk to students who were high schoolers who had not yet been accepted into a college. And the pure excitement and passion and joy, and like you could see on their faces, like, you're what I want to be when I grow up, was like so rejuvenating to me personally, that it just felt like such a way to come back to my students, come back to my classroom, and like bring that to them. I also have like a hour commute in which I sit quietly with absolutely no noise in my headphones. I also have a no questions policy when I get home to my partner. It's like, you are not allowed to ask me any questions for 2 hours. Like, I cannot handle it. So some of the things are just like my own personal implementations to try to like carve out some of that. I also think like, as much as I'm talking about generosity and like giving, you also have to be mindful that like you can't pull water from an empty well. You have to be able to find the things that you're excited about, that you value. Sometimes that's in my own work. Sometimes that's, taking a summer off, or maybe not teaching that winter class that maybe you would want the money and feel like it would be helpful, but like you just got to sleep for a month. I don't know. But it is new ways. They change all the time. And some of it has to do with my own personal boundaries in my life. And I'm still working on it, is my answer, I guess. Yeah. I think we have time for maybe one more question before we got to wrap it up. Yeah. What's up, buddy?
I would like to hear from you about, as the comics industry as a whole is changing, what steps are you taking to kind of keep yourself abreast of new developments in how comics are like published, shared, etc., so that the information, especially in like professional practices that you're sharing with students, is up to date for them?
Excellent question. So the question was, as the industry and as futures change, like how am I staying on top of those changes and bringing that back to the classroom? One of the ways that I do that is like because of that like active participation in my own like art career, is I'm taking my actual stuff and bringing it to class to say like, I went to CXC and here is what this experience of teach and talk was like. Here's how I pitched it. Here's how I brought this. Like I'm on the ground in the field doing that, I think. And then the other component of that I think is really important is I'm actively trying to find new and different guests every time who have very different experiences from my own. I want to make sure that I'm finding people who did not go to grad school, finding people who are doing webcomics, finding people who are doing complete like their own distribution models, who are forging new paths, who are creating new ways, because I personally am not in that space yet, or maybe ever, I don't know. But I want the students to still have access to that. So I think a lot of that is like where my knowledge falls short and my experiences fall short, I'm supplementing by looking to my community, looking to new people, making those connections and building that out. But it's hard to, yeah, right? Thank you, 5-minute warning. I guess we have time for one more. That was a pretty good one, though. I'll answer anything. I don't care. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.